I am Kelly Wayment, and I am at Silhouette headquarters in Utah, and I am super excited to be here. Today we're going to be making a 3D succulent in a frame. So if you have not already purchased this design from the Silhouette Design Store, I will show you how to do that in just a second. But this is the project that we're going to be making. So let me go ahead and start by telling you the materials we're going to be using, the supplies. So this is a paper pack from Michaels. I believe it's the Earth set, just the Recollections paper pack. It's 8.5 by 11. And we're going to use the green, but the blue in there is also really good for succulents. And then we're going to use the brown color for kind of the insert inside the box. And then I'm using a wood grain 12 by 12 paper that I did get at Michael's, but if you've got, you can use a solid color, you can use patterned paper, any 12 by 12 will work. I just chose a wood grain, and this one's actually got a little bit of a texture to it, so it's really fun. But you could use any 12 by 12 paper you want, even a solid brown or something. Okay, so for paper, and then I am using the Tim Holtz Distress Ink set. I'm going to use the green and the purple today, but if you've got ink pads of some of the brand, that will work also. Usually the colors I'm using for succulents are green and blue and purple. This one's actually even got a red. All of these you could use for this coloring your succulents, and I'm going to show you how to do that. You can use anything you want to apply the ink to the paper when we get there, but what I've got are these little just makeup sponge applicators. These are just from the dollar store. I'm sure you can get them on Amazon too. They're just little soft sponges, and you can use really anything, any sponge-like applicator. And I've actually used, I've rubbed the ink pad directly on paper before when I'm coloring flowers and succulents. So you'll see it's pretty easy, it's pretty forgiving. You can do a lot. I'm going to use a little bit of white glue, and I like this tiny needle tip applicator. You can find, just Google needle tip applicator, and you'll find those. For shaping the succulents, I'm mostly going to be using the Silhouette spatula tool. I really like this. I use both the round end and the crease, so it's not just for removing paper off of your mat, it's good for shaping too. And I might use this scraper tool also for shaping. The other thing you're going to need is these glue dots. If you don't have white glue and glue dots, Zots is the brand I'm using, you can probably also use a hot glue gun. So I've got a hot glue gun ready in case I want to use it. But I think that is it for the supplies. So we will go ahead and get started in the software. Okay, so let me share my screen. Hopefully you can see that. That is Silhouette Studio. I'm going to show you how to get the design if you haven't already. Go to the Store tab, and that's going to open up a browser for you on the internet. And what you can just do is go to Deals at the top and Free Designs. And that is going to show the shapes that are available right now for free. And if you scroll down farther, you're going to see things like free with purchase, and so that's a fun area to look. But this is the design we're going for. It's this 3D paper succulent, and it is number 341471. If you haven't already bought it, there's going to be a little button to click to purchase it, to put it in your cart and check out I've already bought mine, but you would just go to the upper right hand corner to click your cart and check out. So I'm going to go back to Silhouette Studio, and once you've purchased it, it'll go into your library. I'm going to go to the library, and you're going to either find it in recent downloads. Personally, I have already marked this with a star, so it's in my favorites. So I've got a favorites folder that goes at the top, and these are all designs that I've just clicked the little star, and it's really easy to find my favorites really quickly. So double click on this succulent frame to open it up. And here we are in our main design page. This succulent at this size, it's that smaller size that I showed you briefly at the beginning. But I'm going to go ahead, and since we can, I'm going to make this a little bit larger. So if you don't want to make it larger, just leave it as is for a second, and all the rest of the process is the same. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and make this bigger. This is all grouped together, and so I'm going to hold my Alt key and click and drag the corner arrow. Any corner arrow will be fine. And I'm going to make this bigger so it's about 11.7 inches. And you can see that that is filling up most of the page. So this big, wide, gray design is going to be what turns into the frame. And so you do need a 12 by 12 Cameo or bigger to cut this frame. If you're working with a smaller machine, that's totally fine. Just don't cut the frame, and we can still do the succulent part. So I'm going to go ahead and move this off to the side, and I'm going to ungroup it. I like to use my little ungroup button at the top. And so now I've got I'm just going to drag my succulent over to the page. And let's go ahead and set up the machine. So I want to set my machine to the Cameo. And I want my cutting mat to be Cameo 12 by 12. And my media size, since I'm cutting the succulent first, I'm going to set this to letter to match my paper. And just turn it to portrait orientation here. I always turn on this box for show cut border at the bottom here in the page setup panel. That way I can see if my design is outside my cut border. And I also have that set to cut at the edge, cut all the way to the edge of my page. So if you've got a tiny little red border, that just means that you're cutting at its default and not to the edge of the page. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and ungroup my succulent pieces, and I'm just going to spread those out. Just click and drag. And you actually can fit 2 succulents on a letter size piece of paper, even with these that we've made slightly larger when we made the whole design bigger. For now, just in the interest of time, I'm just going to cut one so it's faster. And so that's basically it. The design is all set up. So I'm going to go over to the Send tab. And so you will see down here by your machine, it'll tell you if it's ready. To find the machine that you're connected to, you can click always down here on your little machine icon and scroll through these to see what machine is available for you. Most of these are showing unavailable, but I've got the one, Cameo 4, and I'm using Bluetooth right now, and it says ready to load there. And shows ready to load here. Okay, so now we need to set up the material. So the material I'm going to use, this is my favorite for the Recollections paper, is just go to Cardstock Textured Heavy, and the blade automatically goes to, the action automatically goes to cut, and the tool, since I have my auto blade installed in the Cameo 4, it's detected it and it knows I'm going to use the auto blade. The other thing I'm going to do is bump up my blade settings to 4, and I'll leave my force at 30, and I'll go a little bit faster with my speed at 5, and that should be good. Okay, so once I get the paper loaded, I'm just going to click send down here in the bottom of the screen, but I won't show that right now. Okay, so let's go ahead and get this paper loaded. Using my 12 by 12 cutting mat, and I'm using just this green paper. It's fun with succulents to use different colors of paper. You could even cut some of the layers from one color and some from another. On this one, I'm just going to use all one color for all the layers. So I will go ahead and load this. I've checked and made sure that my rollers are set for the 12 by 12 inch mat. So I'm just going to load the edge of my mat so it's lined up with the loading guideline. Press load. And then I will click, you won't see this, but I'm going to click send in Silhouette Studio. Okay, so this is, I'm going to share my screen so you can see the message it's telling me. Okay, so it's telling me to load the cutting mat. I think it's because I'm using Bluetooth, so I'm going to unload and load again and see if that works. All right, I'm still getting my little ready to load message, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip the Bluetooth and just plug it in by USB. All right, so now I need to, excuse me, got a little tickle in my throat. Make sure that I've got the right machine chosen. I'm going to go ahead and use the one that's by Bluetooth. Okay, so now it says ready, it knows it's loaded. So I will stop sharing, or I'll just click send so you can see where that is, and then I'll stop sharing. Excuse me.
So Kelly, while this is cutting, your screen share didn't work when you were in the design store, so people are wondering if you could repeat that step.
Oh, sure. So while that's cutting, I will go ahead and share the design store. Sorry about that. So what I've done is I've gone to deals and free designs up at the top, and then here's this. These are all the shapes that you can get for free, and then further down you can use free with purchase, and it'll tell you where that's, how you can get it free. Sometimes it's with any other design you buy, you can get that one free. Sometimes it'll be like you have to buy a Lori Whitlock design, you know, or some other artist to get that particular design free. But just click on the succulent frame and it'll have a place where you can add it to your cart. And then to actually check out, your cart is up here in the upper right. And it's pretty straightforward. So hopefully that answers that question. Sorry about that. Okay, we're not sharing the screen, right? We're back. Okay, so I'm going to unload this. And I've just got my papers. I can come off. I like to flip my mat over and just, depending on the design, but a lot of times I'll just flip my mat over and this stuff will come off really easily. Use your little spatula tool if that helps. That helps, flipping my mat over helps so I don't get curling of the paper. Okay, so those are all off. And I'm going to set those aside for a moment, and we're going to go back into the software and cut the next piece. Okay, so back to the design tab, and I am just going to, I just dragged a selection box across all of these, and I'm just going to click and drag them over to the side. So in Silhouette Studio, if your design is not on your mat, it's not going to cut. So this is just kind of a holding area off to the side. Okay, so this time I'm going to cut the frame, and you can see that's not going to fit on my letter size paper. I need to go back to my media size over here and choose media size 12 by 12. And if I want to center that onto the page, I've got this quick little button up here that says center to page. That shifted it just a little bit. Okay, so this time we're going to cut the wood grain 12 by 12 paper. So I'm going to go over to the Send tab. And actually those same settings are going to work. So I'm not going to change any of those settings. I just need to load my paper and press Send. Okay, so this one's the wood grain paper. And just line it up. So it's nice and even and stuck really well onto the mat. And I'll press load, and I'll go ahead and send that again. Okay, let me see if I've got any questions. McKenna, are there any questions right now that I haven't answered?
Someone just asked, how can you cut the sides on a portrait? So how would you adjust this project for a portrait?
So for this particular project, I would just skip the frame. I wouldn't cut the frame on the portrait, because if you do, you can, you know how I enlarged it at the very beginning on the design page and just made it all bigger? You could make that all smaller so it fits on a letter size page or A4, whatever you're using with your portrait. But that's going to make it really small. And so this is the default size. You can see that it's quite small. The size that we're doing with the 12 by 12, making it bigger, is this one right here. If you make it smaller, small enough so the frame fits on the portrait, it's going to be even smaller than this. So you could try it, but what I would do is just cut the succulents and use some other frame. I was going to show this later, but I can show it to you right now. This is, I just cut the succulents, a whole bunch of succulents from a couple of different, probably 3 different colors of paper, and I didn't even bother with the frame piece. So I just cut these and colored them and put them in this shadow box frame, and that you can totally do with a portrait machine. So if you want to do the frame, you should probably use a Cameo, but you don't have to use the frame that comes with the file. That's one of the great things about Silhouette Studio, is you can just pick and choose the parts of the design you want, and just use what you want of it. All right, let's go ahead while that's cutting. I'm going to go ahead and start coloring these. And if you don't like getting your hands messy, you might want to wear disposable gloves. I'm just going to go for it, and my fingers will be a little bit green by the end. So I'm just going to take, so these are in, I can put them in size order, but we'll be having to put them in order again later. But you can see largest to smallest. So I'm just going to start pressing this sponge against my ink pad, and you can see it gets a little bit of ink on it, and I'm just going to brush it along the edge. And you won't see a big difference because these are really similar greens, but you do get a little bit of difference, and we're going to be adding purple too. So just going to brush that along there. And these makeup sponges are nice because it makes it really subtle. If you put the ink pad directly against the paper, you're going to get a little starker edge. But I just like to brush this. So I do paper flowers a lot. So if I'm using like a pink paper, I'll use a darker pink ink pad, or even, I'll use a yellow paper with a pink ink pad. And so you can add a lot of variety just by changing your color of paper and your color of ink pad. So that's all we're going to do with all of those, is just brush that ink with the sponge against the tips. And I'm not trying to go all the way down to the crease, because those layers are going to be covered, as we stack them. You're really mostly seeing the edge sticking out. And I'm not trying to fill it in and change the whole color of the paper. I'm just giving a little bit of dimension on the edges. So let's go ahead.
What kind of paper are you using? Is it just regular cardstock?
Yes, this is Michael's Recollection cardstock, and it's labeled as 65 pound. But really, anything labeled cardstock is going to be fine for making paper flowers and paper succulents. So let's unload this. So now we've got our frame. So we'll keep that. And then there's one more piece to cut. And so I'll go one more time to my screen share. Go back to the design page. I'll move this off to the side. And now we're just going to bring this last piece. So these are colored. You can see on the screen that they're colored, but the color doesn't matter when you're just cutting it from colored cardstock. One thing that's nice, that since they are colored, that technically you could do a print and cut and print them with the color that the designer has supplied for you. But mainly I just use this as a cue for what color I want to use. So that's brown. I'm going to be cutting from letter size paper again. So I'm going to switch my media size to letter. That way I know that I'm fitting this on my page. Go back to the Send tab. And again, same settings, and I'll just press Send when it's ready. Okay, so this time I'm going to use the darkest brown out of this set. And you can use whatever color you want, whatever you think is going to look good. It's going to be mostly covered by the succulent, but the piece we're cutting right now is this little background insert. So we'll put that on the mat. Make sure you always put it the same orientation that it shows you on the software screen, so your virtual paper is the same as your physical paper and mat. I'll load that, and I will press Send. Okay, so I'm going to go back and keep coloring these layers. So just dab on the ink pad and brush it on. You might go a little slower at the beginning, but you'll get into a groove and just kind of get used to it, and your flow will improve. This is something that is nice to do while you're watching TV or listening to an audiobook or something. Once you've got these pieces cut out, then you can spend some downtime coloring. Okay, so I've got 3 of those done. I'm going to go ahead and move my laptop. Let's see. Let me go real quick and see if I've got some questions. McKenna, was there anything?
It seems like going back to like the portrait thing, some people are wondering how we resized.
Okay.
So maybe if you could
Yeah,
just
let me
go over
show that one more time. Yes, if you missed the very beginning, you might have missed that part. All right, I'm actually going to open a new document and just show you from the beginning what I would do with the portrait. So I'm just going to click this little plus sign up here to open a fresh document. That's got grid lines on, which I don't need, so I'm just going to tap my letter G to turn off the grid lines. And I'll go to my library, double click this succulent frame. Okay, so this is grouped. I can move it together. I've got my letter size paper on this page, and so you know, in fact, let me change this to portrait so you can see. I can change the machine so you know what it looks like. That might be helpful for you. So you can see that's not going to fit the way it is. If you want to try and do it really tiny, you can select it and just click and drag a corner handle until it fits within the cut border. So you can see here and here, that's the boundaries of your cut border. The machine will not cut outside those lines. And then it's harder to tell, but you've also got top and bottom cut borders. So that's getting pretty small. You can try that on your portrait. The other thing you can do is, so I'm going to go undo so I can get that back to the size that it was. So I would ungroup this and I would get rid of the 2 frame pieces, the frame and the insert. And now you've got your succulent that you can do it at this size. You can make it a little bit larger. You would ungroup this and spread out the pieces so they cut separately. But this is what I would do if I had a portrait. I would just cut a whole bunch of these and then not use that frame. Does that make sense? Hopefully that does.
And can you give the measurements that we did when you resized it for the Cameo to make it as big as you could?
Yes, so when the whole thing is grouped, I've made it about 11.7 inches wide, which is also about 11.7 inches high. So if you just wanted to lock your aspect ratio, make sure whenever you're changing something with like fold lines and stuff, if you're changing your, let's see, show that one more time. So if you are changing the size of something, the quickest way to do it, if you know the exact dimensions, is up here in your scale option for quick access toolbar. And make sure your design is selected. If you have nothing selected, that disappears. So select your design, and let's say we just want to resize this succulent. So I'm going to lock the aspect ratio just to make sure that these change proportionately and doesn't skew and stretch it. So say I want to make this 3 inches. I just type in a 3 and hit enter, and it makes it all change proportionately. So you can resize by either dragging your corner handle. Don't drag your side or your top and bottom because that's going to stretch it and make it really ugly. So undo. And then you can use your scale window to actually input the dimensions that you want. Just make sure if you want it to stay proportional that that little symbol here is showing the lock. Okay, so let's move on to getting this assembled. Okay, so now we've got our insert, and I'm going to go ahead and do the frame. So this has a good side and a bad side. We don't want the white side to be showing with the frame. We want the wooden side to be showing. So basically, the easiest way to do that on this design is you're just going to flip it backwards and then start folding everything inwards. So there's a lot of perforations. They're all going to go the same direction. These are called valley folds when it's curving upwards. So just fold those along the perforations. And if you're working with a different size, if you just went with the default size, that's totally fine. We're doing it the same way. It's just going to be a little bit smaller. Okay, so you can see that's already starting to kind of come together. And that white in the middle is going to be covered with our insert here. So I'm not going to stick it in yet, but same thing, just folding these all the same direction. All right, so once you've got your folds all inwards, I like to glue down this side with the beveled edge first. So it's going to, let's see if I can catch this on the camera. This side right here is going to be flat. It's going to be glued down flat on itself. So basically, I'm just curling it over so the flat side is going to get glued down against itself. And it kind of tucks in right there. This edge just tucks right there against that first crease. So you can use glue dots if you want. I think I'm going to go ahead and use hot glue gun. So I'm just going to glue this. I'm just going to tuck that right against the crease. And set it down. The other thing you can do, since these fold lines are all symmetrical, is you can actually flatten that. You're basically folding this one in half. So putting down some glue, and you can leave it flat while you glue it down, and then it'll pop up to where it's supposed to be. Now this second one, this edge is going to tuck in to the bevel, and I'm not even going to use any glue. I'm just going to kind of squish this around until I can tuck it in. There's really only one way it's going to go, and you'll see it when it's right. So I'm not going to glue down that flat part. Right now I'm just pulling using a hook tool to kind of pull it back into position. And so here is where the little needle tip glue applicator comes in handy. So I'm just going to kind of add some glue under there. And you might need to actually tuck it under there. This looks like it's going to work okay pulling it out. So at the moment it's still movable. So I'm just going to add a little bit of glue. You could also use a glue dot or hot glue. You just don't want it to kind of get stuck on its way as you're tucking it in there. All right, so that will let dry, and we will go back to inking these petals. I'm not doing great at reading the chat myself, so McKenna, would you let me know if there's more questions? Okay, so we'll finish these up. Adding a little bit of color to all the tips. And I'm just doing it on one side because you're really, on this particular design, you're only seeing the top side for the most part. The very last piece, since it does curl up a little bit, I'm going to color the tips on both sides. So on this smallest one, and now you can see where my fingers are starting to turn green. So if that bothers you, wear gloves. Okay, so this one I'm going to flip over and add just a little bit of color to the back side as well. And if you get these flipped after you cut them out, because it doesn't really matter which direction they go, don't worry about if you get one flipped over and can't remember which side to color. Once you have them colored, you obviously want the colored side to show. Okay, so that's the green. And now we're going to add a little bit of purple. When I'm deciding how to color a succulent or a flower, a lot of times I will just do a Google image search, and so I would just type in succulent and it'll bring up a whole bunch of pictures, and you can choose what you want to try and make your flower or your succulent look like. So on this one I'm using a little bit less color. I just want the tips to be purple. And again, you could do this with a red ink pad or a blue ink pad, just for variety. I would generally do the whole succulent, all of its layers the same. And then if you want to experiment with a different ink color, do that on a separate set for your other succulents. Now if this worries you, you can take, if you're not sure what it's going to look like, you can actually take your scrap of paper and just use a scrap and see what it's going to look like, how your sponge is going to work, what the color looks like. You can do that before you commit to the whole thing. Do you have any questions, something I didn't cover very well, or any questions about coloring? Okay. Okay, no questions. So you can see that that's starting to take on a little bit of depth. That's one of the things I really like about making paper flowers and succulents, is that it just looks so different from a flat piece of paper that you start with, and you just get a little bit creative and it turns into something really cool and dimensional. And a lot of times when you're doing something that has a lot of layers, it won't look great while you're right in the middle of it, but as you keep going, it'll kind of evolve. And once you get the whole thing put together, all those little imperfections that you may have had in the middle of it, in the middle of the process, you won't see it. And so just keep going, even if you think it looks ugly. Just keep going and finish the project and see what it looks like when it's actually all assembled together. Okay, and then this is also my last piece, the one we did both the front and the back coloring. So I'm going to do that with the purple also. The succulent is so easy that you might want to do a few succulents just to get the practice, and there's always a use for it. Okay, so we've got this. You can see already that it looks cooler if you were just to, stack this one that was green with no coloring. It looks so much different than the one that's got color added to it, and that's only going to get better as we change the shaping of it. So now let's move on to shaping, and I'm just going to flip it over and work from biggest to smallest, but it doesn't actually matter. Okay, so for this succulent, you can do it however you want. I'm just going to show you how I do it, and have done it for these sample pieces. So I'm just going to take my scraper tool, and if you don't have a scraper tool, that's fine. Find something, even a pencil, because you don't have to use the tip necessarily. Even a pencil would work. So I'm just kind of putting that in the middle and rolling it to give it a little bit of curl upwards. And be careful you don't tear your paper by being too rough with it. Again, this is something you could practice with a scrap of paper first to kind of work on your technique. But on these, I'm just going to roll the center up kind of on itself, and then roll the tip back away in the other direction. And so it's not a big defined change. Once you've done both those motions up and then away, it flattens it out just a little bit again, but it does have some dimension. The other thing you can do is actually spray with a really fine mist of water. You can spray these, and it's a lot easier to manipulate the shape when they're wet. Don't get it super wet, but you can add just a little bit of water and they become really flexible, and you can do a lot more complex shapes, and then you just set it aside to dry. And I always add the color before I do the shaping. Okay, so same on all of these, just curling up. And you can do this. This is the same way I do flower petals. You can do different motions. You can also curl the sides outwards. So let's maybe on this layer we'll do that. We'll curl the sides specifically at the corners. If you want to add a crease that's more defined, you can actually use your scraper tool and just kind of press it against your finger, and that will add a crease. So these are all techniques I use when I'm shaping paper petals. All right, getting closer. I've even used my fingernails before when I didn't have a tool handy. just to put creases and curls in the paper. And on this one, it's getting kind of small, so I'm going to use my spatula tool again to just kind of add a crease instead of trying to curl it up with the end of the tool. So do we have flower makers in the class, or is this kind of a first exposure for most people? So it looks like generally more beginners. Okay, so at this point, let's see, on these tiny ones, it's still easiest to just use the spatula. You could use your fingernail. So I'm just kind of, any kind of dimension is better than just doing it flat. And my finger is soft. If you have a little foam pad, you can also use a foam pad to manipulate your flowers. Okay, so this last one, I'm just kind of curling up to the center. And you can kind of, if you want, you can give it a squish, or you can just be gentle with it and let it do what it wants to do. All right, so now we're ready to actually stick these together. The other thing I would do is kind of hold your finger and lift all these petals a little towards the center. And they'll flatten out a little as you stick them together. But again, anything you can do to give it a little bit of dimension. And you can usually shape these a little further once they are once they're attached too. Okay, so that looks pretty good. So here's where I use my glue dots. These come in handy. So don't try and peel the dots off, the little glue spots off with your finger. You probably can't see them, but there are little sticky glue spots on this backing paper. And so the easiest way, so you don't get your fingers all sticky and you don't warp that glue, is you take it and take the back side of where you want it attached and you just press it against the glue dot and it will release from the backing and pick up onto your paper. And so now the thing you want to make sure of when you're applying any kind of petals is you don't stack them up so they line up with each other. You want them to offset. So you're always trying to split the difference. So when you've got this layer of petals, you want them to go in between the petals or leaves that are below it. So another glue dot onto the back side of this layer. And again, split the difference from the layer before it. And if they're not perfectly splitting the difference, that's totally fine. You just don't want them to be lined up exactly. That looks odd. Okay, and another one. And this one, the designer has made this layer a little bit different, some longer and some shorter. That just adds to the natural look. So that's intentional. And you're gonna get, on this one, I just try and make sure that the longest one doesn't look like it's stacked right on top of the layer below it. And so then finally, this little last piece. Now, if your glue dot is a little bit off, overlapping and maybe showing through, you can just take your fingernail and kind of pull it back on itself, and then it'll be out of the way of being visible, and it'll just kind of stick to itself. So there is the last one. Okay, so that is the succulent that fits this frame. I have found that with this little insert, it is tight enough that I don't need any glue. I just push it down in there. And then we can use another glue dot or hot glue to set that in there. It looks like I may not have let that glue dry long enough, or I maybe would have been better off with hot glue, as that's pulling apart. But I can fix that after the fact. So that is going to just sit in there, and I would put a dab of glue to put that in there, and then it looks like you've got a wooden frame. The other thing you can do with a succulent is just get a little dish and fill it with small stones and just rest your succulent on top. So again, if you've got a portrait and you don't want to cut the frame and make the whole thing smaller, you can just, do it a little dish of stones. You could make this even bigger. When you're resizing your succulent, you could make it bigger. So I think this one was maybe 3 inches or so, and you could make it 4 inches at its widest. Just make sure when you're resizing those that you resize all the layers at the same time, so you're not guessing on how much to change each layer. Just change them all at the same time. Let's see, do we have any other questions? I do have one other trick I want to show you since we do have time. Oh, actually a couple of things. I wanted to show you what some of these other colors look like. So this set, it's not glued together, but this one here is the blue paper from this Recollection set. So it's blue paper, and then I first added a little bit of the green ink, and then on the tips I added some of the blue ink. And so that is kind of a bluish green succulent. And then this one, again, is the blue paper from this set, and all I added was green. And so you can see that those make a fun, yeah, here's my set. So this is, we cut with this green paper for this succulent here, but this one and this one are cut from the blue paper and just added different colors of ink. And then this one is again the blue paper, and I added purple to the ink, purple ink on the edges, and you could again tip that with green or blue. You've got a lot of choices when you're working with succulents. This one also you'll see is a slightly different shape. That's the same size, that's the default size. So this one I shaped exactly the way I showed you, where I was curling and rolling it and then rolled back the edge. This one I actually took my, see, I'll just do it with one of these. Instead of doing a motion where I was curling up against my tool, I flipped it over and I used a longer sharp edge. You could use a ruler or the scraper tool, and I just kind of put a crease towards the center like this. And I did this on the back side, so it's kind of curling away. And that's how I made this one. I didn't do any second curl, I just pressed a crease into the back side of it. And so you can see that's just a little bit a different look for your succulent. And so you've got lots of options, and it's just, I think it's fun to just experiment and practice and see what they do. So the one more trick I was going to show you is when you are trying to line up these stacked layers, sometimes it is hard to get them aligned perfectly. And so one trick that I'll use, this is not the best tool, but I've got it, so I'm going to use it, is to poke a hole. It's easier to find the hole if you're sticking it with it's easier to find the center if you're sticking it with like a pin. And so I will stick, usually I would use a pin, into the very center of each layer. And then, well, everything except maybe the top layer or the top two layers. I'll stop shy of the top two. And then take a little brad. I found these little really tiny brads. And so then I've already got a hole to stick my brad through. And so you can kind of, they still will move a little bit when you're doing your brad, when you've got a brad through it for these different layers. And once you've got them where you want them, you take the brad and spread the legs to kind of solidify where you want. And then you would glue your top two layers on to kind of hide that brad. So I'm not actually going to do it because I didn't shape all of those, but you can see that might help you get everything perfectly centered as you're stacking these layers, because I will usually get to the end and think, oh, that's a little off center. And if that's the case, then you just kind of keep rotating until you see where where it looks best. And so little flaws you can usually hide by the time you get to the end. All right, I think that is about all I had prepared. So, are there any other questions? Hopefully this was fun. I love paper flowers. It's still something I love to do, and I'm starting to do crepe paper flowers because I can cut crepe paper with the Cameo for rotary blade. So I've been doing cardstock flowers for years, and now it's fun to branch into crepe paper flowers, and hopefully I'll do a class on that at some point in the future. But any other questions? Okay, well, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you had fun, and just these are super simple, so I hope you go ahead and practice, and I think you're going to find something you really like to do. So thanks so much for joining me.